Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in the discussion of some selected mineral development initiatives that have taken place in Canada over the years. I hope that these examples will be relevant and interesting as you embark on the Mineral Sector National Development Program that was announced by your minister in December. With over a century of experience in managing mineral development, Canada, of course, has a wealth of experience in this area. I've selected 4 initiatives which I think are quite interesting for their innovative aspects, and I focus on those this morning. As I'm speaking, I invite you to think about the Mongolian context for mineral development and where or how perhaps some of these ideas may be translatable to the mining context here. I'm going to talk about 4 initiatives. One, a large-scale national initiative to consult on the future of mining. I'm also going to talk about 2 developments in the province of Ontario, which is Canada's largest province and largest mineral development region. They have modernized their laws, and they have also put a specific focus on one new area for mineral development. I'm going to talk about British Columbia, also one of Canada's large mining jurisdictions. There they've put a focus on improving the efficiency of government operations in order to meet economic, environmental, and social objectives in the province. And I'm going to talk about the territory of Nunavut, where there's been a very interesting set of administrative changes to better reflect local interests in attracting and developing mineral resources. And I'll offer some thoughts on lessons learned from all of these that I'm hoping we can have an interesting discussion about. It's important to understand when we talk about Canada and mineral development that Canada is a federation, which means that the majority, although not all, but the majority of responsibilities for the directions of mineral development rests not at the national level, but with the 13 provinces and territories. Except for the small province of Prince Edward Island, the other 12 all have had extensive experience in managing their mining resources, and those resources vary widely from coal, base metals, precious metals, uranium, industrial minerals also. There are 2 overarching trends that are important to understand as you listen to the Canadian initiatives. One overarching trend since the 1980s is the new focus on responsible mining or sustainable development, which really is driving a lot of the mineral development initiatives in Canada and internationally as well. The other important trend, as noted in the 3rd bullet, is there's much more focus now on involving local communities in mineral projects that affect them. No longer is it acceptable in Canada for mining policies to be driven from, certainly not from the national capital or even the capitals of the provinces and territories, but increasingly local communities and citizens want to have a meaningful say in not only in sharing from the benefits of mineral development, but in understanding and mitigating the risks. So the first initiative I want to talk about is the Whitehorse Mining Initiative, and it's called Whitehorse only because it was named after the city where the initiative was concluded. The context in the 1990s, as I suggested earlier, was one where people in the industry and people who are stakeholders in the industry were just coming to understand what sustainable development might actually mean. The old models of mineral development not taking into account, for example, adequate environmental protections or involvement of communities, particularly in the Canadian context, Aboriginal communities, was not working. That old model was not working, and there were emerging significant barriers to investment and growth in the sector. So the approach, which I'll discuss in detail in a moment, was really to open the doors to the stakeholders in mining development, to invite them to be partners in the context of ensuring that the mining industry in the country remains strong and that investment was being attracted, but at the same time that Canadians enjoyed diverse and healthy ecosystems and that mining represented a shared opportunity, particularly for local populations. So the ministers in Canada from the provinces and territories and the national government took the unusual step of embarking on a process of dialogue, not knowing where it would end, really. And the structure was done such that the dialogue process was managed in partnership with the industry through the Mining Association of Canada. So to manage the process, they agreed to create what they called a leadership council. And those words are important because the responsibility of the leadership council was to bring together senior people who could work constructively together and achieve something that could be implemented after the discussions were over. So government representatives included people at senior levels, for example, deputy minister or state secretary, to use the Mongolian structure, CEOs from industry, leaders of major labor unions involved in the mining sector, environmental groups, and leaders from First Nations or Aboriginal communities. And all these people were given the responsibility to move the initiative forward and to come up with a constructive approach. Importantly, the process had a beginning and an end. It was not to go on forever. It was an 18-month process, and the Leadership Council agreed on 6 areas where there needed to be improved collaboration in Canada. The 6 areas are listed on the slide. The business climate for mineral investment, land use and managing potential land use conflicts, First Nations and Aboriginal concerns and the participation of Aboriginals in mineral development, protecting the environment, as I suggested before, workers and communities where they live, and improved decision-making by governments. You will understand that in the discussions, there was the potential for significant conflict because there are very different interests being discussed, from people who do not want to see any mineral development at all to people who are aggressively pursuing new mining projects. So the process was specifically designed to provide for professionally facilitated discussions so that each of the different interests could openly and respectfully present their perspectives. Some of the discussions were quite difficult, but it did culminate in the successful completion after 18 months of what's called the WMI Leadership Council Accord. And you can read that in English at the website on this slide. So the content of the final accord, which was accepted by the ministers and accepted by industry, a couple of exceptions, but accepted, there is a strategic vision and some principles and goals. So the strategic vision, which I personally think is quite elegant, is our vision is of a socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable and prosperous mining industry underpinned by political and community consensus. And recall that this process involved hard-nosed mining CEOs whose business is to make money for shareholders, and at the same time, for example, environmental NGOs who are deeply concerned about environmental implications of mining. So the document also included an extensive set of principles and goals that you can read at the website I pointed out, but I want to draw your attention to some selected language from those principles and goals that is here. And these have influenced the pace and direction of mineral development in Canada ever since this was completed in 1994. So you can read the language on the slide. Let me emphasize a couple of these. Streamlined mining regulation, minimum environmental impact, comprehensive reclamation, that's the closure issue, certainty of mineral tenure, maximum practical socioeconomic benefits from mining at the community level, and meaningful opportunity for stakeholder participation. So if you've ever wondered why the SESMIM project that we're all involved with is designed the way it is, there are some clues here. And the Mining Association of Canada's Towards Sustainable Mining program, which I presented in this room 2 weeks ago, is a direct result of the process I just described. I next want to focus in on the province of Ontario, a map of which you can see there. I apologize that it's not very clear, but I want to talk about 2 specific initiatives that the province of Ontario has taken. The first is modernization of the province's mining legislation. They've done this process in 3 phases over a period of 9 years. which is a long time, and I know it's longer than they planned, but there's some good reasons for the time that it has been taking. In the first two phases, and I'm summarizing here, but in the first two phases, they clarified the rules for mining exploration and development companies in terms of their interactions with the many Aboriginal communities that exist in mining areas in Ontario. It took time to work with those communities to develop legislation that could be operational. Also, mining leases in general provide for rights, subsurface rights below the soil, and that can generate conflicts with owners of surface rights, particularly in non-public areas. So there were some conflicts that had arisen that the legislation addressed. Phase 3, which is actually just being completed this year, involved the process of moving from the very familiar staking of physical claims by prospectors to a process of managing the entire claim system online using new informatics technologies. The original plan was that that work would take 2 or 3 years, but it's actually taken 5, principally because of technical complexities in building an online claims registration system. And I think the point I would like to emphasize that may be relevant in the Mongolian context is that when the government decided to make the Mining Act modernization a priority, staff and financial resources were reallocated to the task. And even at that, it took quite a while, but it required dedicated staff and resources to get the job done. Another initiative in Ontario, which I think is very interesting, is their so-called Ring of Fire initiative, which is about putting a special government focus on pursuing mineral development in a specific and remote region of the province where exploration results have been very promising. You understand very well, better than most countries, the challenges of encouraging mineral development in remote regions where transportation and communication infrastructure is poor and where the costs of mineral development are high. And it's the same case in remote Northern Ontario. So the Government of Ontario Ministry of Mines created what they call the Ring of Fire Secretariat, which is a one-stop shopping office, and it's located in Toronto, so it's close to the financial center, and its objective is to do all the necessary work so that there's a concentrated focus on addressing all the challenges of mineral development in that remote area. So among the issues they're dealing with are transportation, land use, community involvement, and coordination of the environmental impact assessment processes. Switching to British Columbia, there the focus since 2012 by the British Columbia government was a so-called improved service delivery, one process model. So the language that they chose to describe their initiative is interesting, I think. One land base, one land manager, even though different ministries have different statutory responsibilities. So in 2014, the Ministry of Mines created a major mines permitting office whose mandate is to coordinate all the various permitting requirements across the government of British Columbia, with a couple of exceptions, but generally that's their mandate. I made a presentation on this 2 weeks ago when we talked about single window approaches to mine regulation. And some of you may have been there, and I'm expecting that as part of our joint work under SESMIM in 2018, we can explore more closely how this single window model might be applied in the Mongolian context. British Columbia Mines Law, the authority for issuing mine permits rests with the Chief Inspector of Mines, who is a senior public servant within the Ministry of Mines. However, by law, he is required to set up a mine review committee in order, as a part of the process, to issue mine permits. These mine review committees are important because the participants include other government ministries involved in the regulating process, for example, the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Forests and Natural Resources. And also, there are mine review committees for smaller mining projects that are managed not at the provincial level, but at the specific local or regional level within the province. At the regional level, the mine review committees are standing committees, so they're brought together whenever the project proponent brings forward a proposal to open a new mine. And these committees work with the company, with the proponent, right through the application process. And the important point that I'd like to draw your attention to is that the existence of these committees enables the government to work with industry and with local communities to work through specific issues, sometimes difficult issues, that might arise as a project is developed. So there's a formal mechanism in place to manage issues that arise around mining projects. The third interesting example I want to briefly mention is Canada's newest territory, Nunavut, which was only created in 1999, and prior to that date was part of the Northwest Territories. It's a huge area of 2 million square miles with a population of only 38%. And importantly, and the large part of the reason why this territory was created was to respect the needs of the local Aboriginal community, the Inuit there. The territory of Nunavut was created in the context of a Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, which is a comprehensive agreement between the local people and the national government on the full scope of their local interests, whether they be cultural, environmental, social, or economic. What's interesting here, I think, from an international perspective, is that the creation of the territory required the establishment of a whole new series of mining management institutions, and those institutions in this case were very much centered on the needs of the local people. So there are a series of institutions have been set up in the territory that allow direct involvement by Inuit people along with the governments in determining their local development directions. Within the territory, there's a much smaller area of land where the Inuit people directly own the surface and subsurface rights, and they now themselves are issuing the licenses, the mining leases and licenses. So in 2016, for example, there's significant activity in this remote region. 3,335 claims have been staked, and 477 mining leases have been issued. So I invite you to think about this as an interesting model where mineral development, which is really foreign to the local culture and foreign to the local way of life, is now being managed with direct local involvement, and mineral development projects are proceeding while at the same time local cultural issues and concerns are being respected. So again, these are a selected set of Canadian initiatives that have emerged in the context of Canada. The context of Mongolia is very different. So let's think about what from the Canadian experience, as I've summarized here, might be useful and relevant for you. You will have your own opinions about this, of course, but let me offer some of my own thoughts. First, with respect to the Whitehorse Mining Initiative consultative process, I think it's notable that there was focused dialogue and that the process over 18 months was adequately financed. It worked because the people who participated knew that ministers, senior people were listening, the decision makers were listening, so it wasn't talk for its own sake. It was unprecedented in Canada to have such a strong common path forward and to have people work through issues, difficult issues, in an open way. After the initiative was finished, consensus on the next steps was actually difficult in the Canadian context, but individual provinces and territories and the national government each took their own approaches based on the consensus I described. The 2 points I want to emphasize with respect to Ontario are that they have taken a careful and stepwise approach to modernizing their Mining Act. And as a matter of policy, they've put a strategic focus with resources and reorganization in order to put emphasis on a priority development region. In BC, we can look at a practical example of how ministries are collaborating to meet shared objectives that the government of British Columbia has articulated. Good quality, streamlined decision-making on mine permitting is important for responsible mining. In Nunavut, despite a small population and many people with very little familiarity with mining, they were able to create new mining institutions with local leadership. And mining development there is going ahead based on principles and policies that are directly relevant to that region. So probably you know much better than me what the implications, if any, are of these Canadian initiatives for Mongolia's Mineral Sector National Development Program. But from my perspective, I'd like to suggest 3 points. The first is that in designing the program, planning it and its careful design will be keys to success. None of the Canadian initiatives I described are perfect. Far from it, believe me. But they have had good success because there's been careful design work at the beginning. I think that open dialogue with stakeholders in the mining industry will lead to greater support from the results of the program when it is completed. Share the accountability so that the partners in mineral development own part of the responsibility to make the program a success. And maybe an obvious point, but I think it still bears emphasis. To be effective in minerals development requires considering all dimensions of responsible mining. That's social, economic, and environmental, and they really do need to be addressed together. The State Great Chorale in 2014 passed the State Minerals Policy, as you know, from 2014 to 2025. And I think it provides a strong foundation for future work. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I put a couple of fun pictures at the end with some Mongolians and Canadians sharing an interest in hockey. So I thought that was a very nice picture to capture the spirit of the discussion. So thank you.